Well, good morning. It is Thursday, the 17th of December, 2009. I'm Cindy Hirschberg, your interviewer, and we're happy to have with us today Mr. Byron Hollinger as our interviewee. Let me say good morning and ask you to tell me a little bit about being born and raised here in Carroll County.
And good morning to you, Cindy.
Good morning.
It's a beautiful day. I was born in Baltimore at the hospital while my parents lived in Westminster. And they moved from Baltimore to Westminster back in 1937 or so. So I guess I was really living in Baltimore when I was born.
Mm-hmm.
Dad worked for General Motors and ran into Mr. Davis Buick, in his travels with General Motors.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Davis liked him so much that he invited him to come into business with him in the Buick business. And so Dad and the family moved to Westminster, and we moved to Belgrove Square in 1937 or 1938. That's the square that's Brethren Church is on one side and the UCC Church is on the other side of the park. And it was a neat place to live. It was a little Victorian house, and the people who live there right now have gotten it all fixed up very, very nicely. And it backed up to Myers Grocery, and Myers would bring their pigs and hogs into that area. And my brother and I used to love to go in the backyard and watch the hogs being unloaded. And then we would hear the squealing and then see the blood run down the street as they were butchering. And I guess I never realized that we were eating bacon and sausage from those hogs, probably. But it was a nice place to grow up as a kid.
What were your parents' names?
Dad's name was Kenneth Ray Hollinger. Everybody knew him as Ray Hollinger.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother was Kay Hollinger, and they both attended the Brethren Church there on
Do you remember
Belgrove
her
Square.
maiden? I'm sorry. Do you remember her
Her maiden name was Hammond.
Okay.
Nancy Catherine Hammond.
And she was from the Baltimore
area?
area?
She was from Kentucky.
Oh, Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, how did they meet?
They met in Indiana when her parents moved into Indiana as itinerant farmers.
Mm-hmm.
Dad lived in Indiana and Ohio. Dad was in his last year of high school. He was driving a school bus, and Mother was on the school bus with him, and I think that's how they met.
That's a lovely story.
Yeah.
So where did you go to school?
I went to school here in Westminster, at Westminster Elementary and Westminster High School. And the elementary school was just down the street. We lived on Green Street at that time. We had moved up to the East Green Street, and East End Elementary School was
Mm-hmm.
there. So we were able to walk about 3 blocks to school. And then after elementary school, we were able to walk about 10 blocks to the high school, which was very nice.
Mm-hmm. How many kids were in your class?
We had probably large classes in high school, 20 or 30. That was large for us. The only disappointing thing was, by living so close to the schools, I never got to ride in the school bus.
Did that break your heart?
And that broke my heart, yeah. Because I was always jealous of the country kids coming in on the school bus. I never got to ride the school bus.
Were there any kids that you went all through school years with?
Many. One was Pat Richter Amos.
Mm-hmm.
And she and I oftentimes would walk to school together because she was a neighbor, and she graduated with me from Westminster High School. And we both attended Western Maryland College
Mm-hmm.
also. Yeah.
What was your favorite subject in school?
I liked pre-med. In fact, I got into pre-med at college before I flunked out because I didn't care for chemistry, or it didn't care for me. And then I went in the military for 2 years.
Mm-hmm. What
And
branch?
I was in the Army, 2nd Army Band located at Fort Meade. very fortunate to be
Are you
able to
saying
do
you're a
that.
musician?
I was a musician.
Ah, what was your instrument?
My instrument was trombone. So I got to play the trombone in the front streets of Philadelphia and Washington, D.C. So I was very fortunate that my father and mother had bought me a trombone when I was in elementary school.
Do you remember your music teacher?
No, I don't. One name comes to mind was Sampson in the high school. Stu Myers from Myers, or Stu's Music Shop, which is still around. He's dead now, but his son takes over the store. He taught me my first trombone lesson.
How long did you study trombone?
Several years there, and then several years with him as an elementary student. And then after I graduated from high school, I played trombone in the college band and orchestra. Then when I got in the Army, they sent me to band training school for a couple of years.
Did you apply to the Army to be a musician, or they just
No,
decided?
they just decided that they needed a trombonist. Pretty bad, because I was the third trombonist.
Did you do jazz or anything, or was the
No,
marching stuff?
I really didn't.
Was the marching stuff?
Yeah, just the marching stuff.
Do you still have music in your life?
Not really. I'd like to play the piano again, so I do have the piano. I'd like to learn how to relearn how to play, because I did take piano lessons at the college from a lady by the name of Grace Murray, who was their piano instructor at that time. So I enjoyed the piano back then, and I hope to pick it up again soon.
Sounds good. So what career did you follow?
After the service, I went to 2 years at Otterbein College in Ohio, outside of Columbus, Ohio, and graduated there in business. Decided that it was not wise to go in business with my father and brother, who was already in the Buick business at Davis Buick, because even though my brother and I got along very well together, I thought maybe not wise to be in business with family.
Yeah.
So I went to work for General Motors in San Antonio, Texas.
Oh, you left Howard.
I
You left the
left
county?
Carroll County, and enjoyed that work for, actually I was in San Antonio for 40 years, but 20 years of that I was with General Motors. And General Motors transferred me to Dallas from San Antonio, and didn't care for Dallas that much. So we moved back to San Antonio, and I went to work for a savings and loan in San Antonio.
Interesting.
I worked for the savings and loan until the savings and loans went belly up, and as all of them did in Texas. And then I went to work as a city manager for 7 years before I retired.
Yeah. What was your job responsibility with GM?
It was calling on dealers, as my father used to do before he went to Davis Buick.
Oh, calling on dealers, what, to sell them their
To
floor
sell
plan?
them, to help them coordinate between them and the factory, ordering cars and ordering trucks, helping specify, help with specifications of trucks
Okay.
on what items to buy.
Yeah, were you working with them on the financial side?
No, I wasn't.
Just on the hardware?
Just on the hardware part.
Yeah, the hard stuff.
I
Oh,
was
cool.
actually a sales engineer for GMC truck at that point.
Good machines.
Mm-hmm.
They're good machines.
I'm still driving GMC.
The transfer to Dallas had you doing the same thing, is that correct?
Actually, I transferred to Dallas to become a sales engineer, more in the engineering aspect, because we had a large branch there. And the branch sold lots of heavy across-the-road trucks. We would go out to yellow freight lines, the large freight line, and help them specify different workings for their trucks. And that was my main responsibility.
Really big rigs, huh?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
And how did you happen to transfer from that to savings and loan?
Actually, my wife had, at that time, was, before we left San Antonio, she had been working for a gentleman by the name of Henry Cato. And when we left San Antonio, she had to leave him, and we got to Dallas, and about a year later, he called and said, I need you back in the business, because he was going to become an ambassador.
Wow.
And she was needed to help run his family business and personal things. So that was another reason that we
It's a
moved
package
back
deal.
to San Antonio.
It's
It was
packaged
very nice.
Very,
And,
very fortunate.
So we moved back to San Antonio to do that for my wife, and then I found the savings loan job.
Very nice.
Yeah.
So,
It had nice perks.
I guess.
He had homes in Aspen, Colorado, and so we were able to ski and do summer camping and that type of thing in Colorado because of his generosity. Yep.
Very pleasant.
Mhm.
Very pleasant. Have your vacations worked out for you that way?
Very nice.
Did you have children?
We had no children.
May I ask something about your wife? What was her name?
My wife was Martha Bankert, known as Marty Bankert, and she grew up here in Carroll County also. Her father was in the Bankert canning business in Hampstead. You were talking about canning a little while ago.
Earlier, yeah.
And they had the Bankert Brothers Canning in Hampstead.
One of the big names.
Mhm.
That and Shriver, I think, were the big
That's
names.
correct.
Yeah. How did you meet her?
Met her in school. Actually, I first met her finger painting in my parents' kitchen when she was 4 and I was 6, I think. And so we kind of grew up together in school.
How did you decide that she was the lady?
I think she decided that for us. Yeah. It was mutual understanding.
Oh, okay. How did you pop the question?
You know what? I don't remember doing that. We dated so much during the school years, off and on, and I don't remember when the question was popped. Probably at Christmas time.
Yeah. When were you married?
And married in June of 1960.
Nice. Where? Here in Carroll County?
In Carroll County.
Okay, so all of this moving to other places, you were married in...
I came back from Texas to marry here, and then took her to San Antonio with me.
Great fun. And you say you had no children, right?
Had no children.
Do you have brothers?
I had one brother, Ray Hollinger, who was who went into the Buick business at Davis Buick, and he died 5 years ago on the tennis court when he was 74 years old.
Aye.
He had 4 children, and 2 of the boys went into the Buick business and took over the agency at that time.
And what brought you back to Carroll County?
Let's see, my first wife died in 1996 in San Antonio, and I came back for a Christmas concert and met my second wife. My parents had, and my brother had invited me to go to a Christmas concert with them, and they brought this lady along with them, and her name was Charlotte Hagee Bright, and she was also a Carroll Countian. And it was love at first sight with her, and so we got married 4 months later, and I took her back to San Antonio with me, and then worked for a couple more years, and then retired and moved back to Westminster in order to be with family. Her family as well as mine, and she had 4 children.
Did you ever ask your parents and siblings about matchmaking?
I think they were matchmakers.
Actively?
Certainly, actively.
Did you ever ask them? And they said,
They
me?
they don't admit to that. That's right.
And how do you fill your days these days? What are your hobbies?
My hobbies right now are actually I only have one hobby, and that's playing tennis. I've been playing tennis and following my brother's advice to play tennis. And it's fun. Been playing outside as well as inside.
Wonderful.
Yes, yeah. Keeping fit.
Going back to your military career, were you always, where were you stationed? Were you always
Stationed at Fort Meade.
You never left there?
Other than for several months at Fort Dix. Fort Dix was the band training school. And then Fort Meade, we were kind of second to the Army Field Band in Washington, D.C. So when they went out of town or went out of the country, they were asked, we were asked as a Second Army Band to come in and play their gigs in Washington, which was very nice to be
I was
able
going to say, those would be...
to play for Queen Elizabeth
Yeah.
and General MacArthur and a few of those other.
I guess you never got a chance to meet them.
Never
You
got
had to
the
stand at
chance to meet
attention
them,
and,
no.
yeah, hold you.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But it was fun duty. I was
Yeah.
very fortunate to be able to get in the band, not
Even-
to have to carry a rifle.
What did you think your Army career would contain? Certainly not a trombone, right?
I had no idea. I just had to
Did you enlist or were
do
you
so. I
drafted?
enlisted because I had flunked out of school and I needed to do something to get my mind back in gear. And that helped because I did well then once I got back to college.
I can't picture you flunking out,
Yeah.
Byron. I just... What else was going on in your life?
I
that
think
you...
probably love life probably.
Oh, that's
That-
when
that probably helped.
you were getting real serious
Mhm,
with...
I think so.
I see. Well, you're not the only young man who
That's right.
tells that story, for sure. Do you spend a lot of time with family now that you're back in the
Yes,
county?
actually, the direct family I've left is my mother, and she's 104 years old now, living in Sykesville
Oh,
at
Byron,
Fairhaven.
how wonderful.
Yes, and she's in very good shape.
Mhm.
Yeah. And
As sharp as...
she's a delight.
Sharp as you?
I've trained her very well.
Are there holidays...
Everybody asks why she's living so long, and I keep telling her that it's because I raised her well.
Well, good of you to do that.
Yeah.
So good of you. Are there holiday traditions that you look forward to? Or, you know, this is the Christmas
There
season.
had been until my wife died in May of this year. So I'm not really looking forward to holiday tradition this
Yeah.
year.
Yeah.
But my wife's children have been taking good care of me and keeping me on the straight and narrow.
Big job, huh?
Yeah, yes it is.
I understand from previous conversations that you were, how did you get involved with traveling in a motorhome?
Oh, the motorhome was a delight. My second wife introduced me to motorhoming. And we traveled, I guess, at least 100,000 miles over the last 6 or 7 years in the motorhome. And we had a small one to start off with. It was a little 20-foot van, and we did Alaska, and Montana, Florida, New England. So we saw a lot of the country in motorhome.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Why would you prefer motorhomes over hotels?
Motorhoming is a lot more fun because you get to meet more people who have similar interests. You get to do the out-of-doors activities such as birding and hiking. So it's just a healthier environment, I think.
Okay. And you were an avid birder, as I recall?
Yes,
Yeah.
I was.
Do you have a
Yeah.
life list?
No, I don't.
You don't?
No, I'm not that avid birder.
Do you have scopes and binoculars
No,
and
just
stuff like that?
binoculars. We carried binoculars with us all the time.
When you would be traveling, would you camp in a particular place in the hopes of seeing something wonderful, or it was just a happenstance?
Specifically in Florida, as we were talking, the Florida wildlife is just wonderful. The birds
Exotic.
down there. One time I remember seeing a kite. The bird has the name of I think it's kite, and it looks like a kite. It's got about an 8-foot wingspan, and I thought it really was a real kite flying, but it was a bird flying.
Huh.
And we saw that in the Everglades in Florida as
Wow.
we were driving from east to west across.
Were you ever able to photograph any of these guys?
Not real well, no. I used to photograph hummingbirds when we lived in San Antonio. Had lots of hummingbirds down there.
They're magical.
Yeah, they were magical.
Yeah.
Had one that we got stuck on the bird feeder one time. The sugar water got so gooey, I guess, that it stuck his bill, and we had to go out and pull him off the feeder. And he flew away. He was fine.
Wow, I've never heard of that.
You know, the sugar water would get sticky if you don't rinse it or wash it every day or so.
Yeah. Did you have a special formula, special recipe to keep them coming back?
No special recipe.
No? Wow. Because you hear a lot of conjecture about whether refined sugars or some of the colored sugar products are good for the little guys.
No, just plain old sugar water.
Plain old sugar.
Yeah.
Did you cook it?
Yes, I would, and then I'd put it in the refrigerator.
And freshen it up how often?
Every other day.
Did ants show up?
Supposed to wash the feeders every other day.
Yeah, to keep the ants off and stuff. Wow. Well, you know, we have a lot of life experience that you bring to the table, and I'd like to ask you to put your thinking, your philosophical hat on, and suggest to our listeners whether there's any life philosophy or life advice that you would like to share with some of the listeners.
Cindy, that's a good question. I am not a reader, but I miss reading, and I think that education and learning to live with other people, I think we all need to read more in life's experiences of other people. So my suggestion to young people growing up is to get a book and keep on reading the rest of your life.
Sounds like good advice. What's your advice about how to deal with other people? To get along with those people you mentioned?
As the Bible says, do unto others as you would yourself.
Solid advice, huh? Well, let me say thank you very much, Byron, for joining us this morning.
Welcome.
We appreciate your time to capture some of your thoughts and experiences growing up in Carroll County.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure.
5, 6, 7.
Okay, yeah.
Roll.
Byron, I'd like to hear a little bit more about your grandparents.
Yes, grandparents were from Ohio, but I think they immigrated from Lancaster, Pennsylvania area. And so we find that there are a lot of Hollingers from that area who have gone across the country. In fact, my nephew found one, Byron Edward Hollinger, which is my name, in Virginia Beach a few weeks ago. He happens to be running a friend's school.
Actually met him? Actually met a man with your exact name.
So I suppose, and he was from Lancaster County, so I assume that most of the Hollingers emigrated from Germany to Lancaster County, Pennsylvania.
So the immigrant ancestor would have landed in Lancaster, the Lancaster area. What were your grandparents' names? Do you recall?
Grandparents were Amos and Effie Hollinger. They were farmers in Ohio. In fact, Dad's father, my grandfather, had some of the first electric in his home that were fired by acetylene. So he rigged up his own electricity, which I thought was very interesting. Dad was
That's
very
some
proud of
cutting-edge
his father.
technology,
Yes,
yeah.
it was. Yeah, acetylene lights.
Yeah. Wow.
Yes.
And that would have been about what time?
And that would be in the early 1900s.
That's pretty amazing.
Mhm.
Got a couple more questions. Do you remember anything about the Depression? Were you?
I don't remember a thing about it. I'm not that old,
Oh,
Cindy.
I beg your pardon, Byron. I beg your
No, I
pardon.
don't, other than I remember the war
Yeah.
years when we had blackout times for air raid warnings. The sirens would be blown in Westminster, and everybody would have to turn their lights out. Dad was a warden, so when he would come home from work, he would have to go out and take his little flashlight and be certain that no lights were shining. Everybody had pulled their blinds or had turned out their lights. So that was kind of a frightening time of my life.
Did you have a victory
Experience.
garden?
We had a victory garden. We had a large victory garden. Yes, and then Dad would barter for sugar back in the days when sugar was being rationed during the war. And I think when he would do some work on some cars, farmers or somebody would bring him a bag or two of sugar, which was a no-no back then because you were supposed to use coupons to buy sugar as you were to buy gasoline also.
Yeah. What was your job in the garden?
Oh, I weeded the garden with my grandmother back then. We had Dad even, in order to help get along back in those days, he even built a garage on the back of our property on Green Street, which for which he rented about 8 spaces to the telephone company for their trucks back then. My brother and I used to go down to the telephone company, which is only a block down the alley, and pick up the dry cell batteries. And they were never completely drained from electricity, so we would use those batteries to rig up certain toys that we played with.
Would you make the toys?
Well, mainly we make little telephones to go back and forth to each other.
You would have a handset? This is not two tin cans and string. This is...
Well, it was both tin cans and string as well as little wires that we would use.
And you could actually hear each other? Wow. Wow. Was your brother was pretty technically inclined, is that correct?
Yes, he was a neat brother. He taught me a lot. He was 4 or 5 years older than I was.
Was he an engineer or
No,
what? No?
No, he was a businessman.
He just had the knack, huh? That's amazing. Is it he who taught you tennis?
Yes.
At a young
he
age?
was. Yes.
Were you in leagues and things?
No, I don't think we were in leagues, but the tennis court, the municipal tennis court, was only several blocks from our home, and so we would walk down there in our whites. Of course, you always, back in those days, had to wear whites as you do, and at Wimbledon these days, you still wear white. You can't wear anything else but. Whereas around here, I can wear blacks if I want to.
Yes. Yes. And sweatpants.
Enjoy tennis very much. It's good activity.
Yes, it is. Who
You
do
can
you play
the
with?
rest of your life.
Who do you play with around here?
Don Riley lives down the road from us here at Carroll Lutheran Village. And then we have several men here at the village who continue to play. Sam Edelman plays with me some.
I've seen you out there bundled up
Yes.
in the weather,
Yes.
and thought, they either love it or they're mad as hatters. It's got to be one or the other.
And then let's see, I grew going back to where we grew up on the park, Belgrove Square. Used to ride a tricycle there between the two churches in Belgrove Square, and fell off a tricycle one time, and the handlebar didn't have rubber grips on it, and it went through my cheek.
Oh, golly.
There. And good old Dr. Billingsley, that is Billingsley Medical Building out at the hospital, was, attended me and sewed up my cheek, so that's my scar on my cheek from that.
You could pretend it was fencing.
Or football or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Do you remember neighborhood stores and stuff from that neighborhood?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, the Myers grocery store, which was in back of us, that slaughtered the hogs and pigs. And then there was a Smitty's grocery store up on Green Street, or up on Main Street across from the old post office. And I remember Mother sending me to Smitty's grocery store to pick up groceries. And Smitty was always letting me lift one of the little canisters that had cookies in the front of the counter. They had maybe a dozen different little compartments with cookies, and he'd always let me have 1 or 2 cookies for my trip into the grocery store.
Yeah.
It was a neat little store.
Yeah.
That's no longer there. In fact, there are very few little grocery stores left.
Not many. Did you ever work in one of the neighborhood
No.
stores as
No,
you were
I never
coming
did.
up?
I mowed yards.
Mhm.
Mr. Davis, the Davis Library is named for, and from whom my father bought the business. He bought a nice motorized lawnmower for me, assuming that I would mow his yard for him for free, and then I was able to use that lawnmower to mow lawns in the summer and make some money.
Did it work?
And it worked very well.
What'd you do with the money?
I don't know what I did with the money.
Tennis equipment?
Tennis equipment. We'd go to the movies. My brother and I used to love to go to see the Roy Rogers and Gene Autry and the music in the theaters at State Theater, which is no longer in town, and Carroll Theater. Those two theaters we visited as kids.
What did it cost to get in?
As I remember, a dime or a quarter. Yeah,
Did you buy candy?
I'm sure we did. Juicy fruit candy. And I guess I never realized till I was older that the second floor at the State Theater was designated for the black folks, and since they couldn't, they weren't allowed to sit on the first floor of the theaters.
Yeah, what turned that light bulb on?
Don't know. Don't know at what time that actually changed.
Huh.
But that wasn't even talked about until I was older, and I realized that the blacks weren't allowed to sit on the first floor of the theaters. Such a sad time.
Yeah. Did you have
And
any
the
black
college
friends?
didn't even allow Negroes at that, back in my day.
Did you have any black friends?
No, really didn't. We had black folks who worked for us at the company. And so I've learned to become friends of a lot of them over the years. And that was a tragic experience, I think, that they weren't allowed to mix with the whites. My brother and I used to play at the old Robert Moton School area. There was fields up in that area that we used to take our BB guns up there and play in the fields. There was one person that the community, or at least our generation, grew up with, who was a black man who helped us school patrolmen at the crossing of the elementary school. And can't remember his name was Clarence, and he would always kid with us children. He would say, "Shut one eye and shut the other eye, dark, ain't it?" That was one of the fun experiences of going to school, was seeing Clarence at the school crossing.
Year-round, morning and afternoon,
Year-round.
huh?
He was always there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What would you do in the summertime? Did you? I know you mowed lawns. You
I
had
mowed yards,
Yeah.
and then I would help.
How many? How many customers?
Probably 10, and then I would help my father clean the shop at the business, at the Buick business. And there were 8 apartments above the garage, and I would have to clean the hallways for the apartments.
Did you get paid?
And oh yes, I got paid. Mr. Davis owned some apartments by the sewing factory on John Street. And so he would ask me to go over there and clean the hallways for those apartments also. And then that burned down, I can't remember, somewhere in the 60s or 70s, the sewing factory building burned down. And that's when that whole area there was changed. Mr. Davis, of course, was the one who gave money to start the Davis Library. And that began in the old Methodist Church up on Main Street. And he gave lots of money to the college also. He was a very philanthropic man.
Good way to be.
He was a great man. He was kind of my grandfather,
Oh, yeah?
though not related.
Can you remember any particular moments with this man that
Many
are special
moments.
for you?
His home was on was on Main Street, and it's still there, but it's occupied by massage and chiropractic practice right now. It's a yellow home. Large 3-story home with beautiful woodwork inside, and he would often ask me to come join them for breakfast. And he always had a colored maid who would appear at the times when he wanted her to, and I never quite understood how she would know when she was supposed to come into the dining room and help serve, and that was, I learned later he had a buzzer on the floor that he pushed.
So it wasn't magic after all?
It was
huh?
magic. But he was a wonderful, wonderful man. He had a beautiful white goatee that I used to love to stroke. And he would let me sit on his lap as a kid. And often would give me a quarter or so once in a while. So that made me very grateful to him. Yeah.
Special memory, for sure.
He was a grand man.
Any other special memories like that? Special people in your life coming up?
No, I think actually W.H. Davis he was my biggest memory of my childhood.
Yeah. And thinking, you've mentioned very fondly spending time with your brother. Did he have chores around the house too?
He always had to go to the bathroom when chores had to be done. And I used to kid him about that. As soon as dinner was over, he had to head for the bathroom, and then I was left to do the, I'm kidding, but I'm sure that.
You think your parents ever wised up on that one?
I don't think so. And then I had a sister, her name is Joyce, and she's still living. She married a local person also by the name of Richard Meyerly. He became a PhD chemist when he was 21 years old, and they moved out of town, and they've since retired for many, many years and living in Cleveland, Ohio now.
You get to see him much?
See him once a year.
Do they come to Carroll County, or do you trek on out?
They come to Carroll County.
Yeah.
Because Mother's still here in Carroll County.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What fun. Who does the cooking when all the family comes to town? Where do people gather?
We usually gather at Fairhaven.
Okay,
Fairhaven
which is
Retirement Home
where your mom is. Yeah.
in Sykesville.
And when the gang gathers, how many are there?
Not very many now.
To be your sister and her hubby, is he?
Sister and her hubby, and my brother's children, and their children. So 15, 20 at the most.
Well, that's enough for a good party, don't you think?
It is.
Yeah. And your mom has all of her marbles and places who are
She
the grandkids.
has more
and
marbles
kids?
than I do, I think. Yes.
Really? So she places the kids and the grandkids and the great-grandkids? That's pretty exciting.
Yeah, she has one great-great-grandson now.
At what age?
Just born several months ago.
Nice.
That's Joan Hollinger's grandson.
Very nice.
Yep.
Very nice.
Okay.
Okay. Now, did I miss anything again?